to another episode of A Rockstar Take On. And this is a Rockstar Take on failure. And I already failed the first take. So now I'm like completely on topic already. So this was not the first time this year that I failed. So I'm recording this late February 2026. I'm going to post it on the 2nd of March. And looking back on the first 2 months of this year, I have never had so many failed takes. I have never wasted so many hours making videos that ended up being thrown away or that had to be redone. And so I have a lot of experience with the concept of failure. And what I realized was that it is so much tied to our idea of productivity. So we live in a society that is completely centered around productivity, and that really kind of like stifles us into being these, workhorses, being these productivity obsessed employees or productivity obsessed entrepreneurs, or even being productivity obsessed creatives. And that is really where why productivity is such a difficult concept, but also why it is why failure is such a difficult concept. Because if you like worship the god of productivity, then failure becomes get a lot of like emotional weight to it, because you're breaking pattern. You're kind of no longer a functioning member of society, to put it like really dramatic. So failing at something is basically admitting or getting like, a one-way ticket out of there, or to kind of like like the naughty corner where you have to stand because you failed at being productive. So failure is very much a uh the taboo on it, or even the word itself, is very much a reflection of the society that we live in. And it's the idea of failure is inherently a non-creative, a non-creative concept. Because if you come from creativity, something is not creative or something is not art if you can determine its outcome beforehand. As long as you can determine the outcome, if you make videos that you will always work out, you're not creating art and you're not being creative. Because creativity and art are always things where you can't 100% control the outcome. That's the thrill of it. It's the wholesome element of it, and it's also the hallmark of creativity and art. So if you're a creative, and if you're an artist, then you will always feel that contradictory agenda of what society expects of you, or what your your agent expects of you, or what your audience expects of you, or and what needs to happen. The space, the creative space that you have to hold for yourself in order to kind of like noodle around a little bit, and be creative and be curious, and lose a lot of hours. So just to give an example, last week I I completely lost myself in a topic that didn't have anything to do um, uh, uh, with my creative outlets, or with my work, or it didn't have anything to do with anybody else, or not tied to my creativity, not tied to the people around me or what they think is important. It was it was basically just me, because I logged my hours, you know, logging down. I think at the end of the week it was almost like 6 hours that I had lost into this new topic. So I failed to put that um into work hours, or I failed to put it into content creation, or I failed to do anything productive with that in, normal productivity standards. And yet I just made my week review. If you're also interested in learning that work method, the work method where you kind of just look back on Friday, I'm recording these on Friday, um, looking back on Friday on what you did that week. If you're interested in learning that or applying that for yourself, I will be making a video about it next week, so subscribe to the channel. But I also offer a service where we can do that together on a Friday if you want. So check the link in below. Anyway, it was my Friday. I looked back on the week and I saw that those hours that I spent on that subject had actually brought me an insight into my personality, into what happened the past 8 years. It was by far the most productive thing I had done that week. It was the biggest success of the week. It was not a failure at all. So I think that is my let's see if I have a little bit more time. But that is my like kind of like the first takeaway I have for you. Or well, actually the second. The first takeaway is, because we have such a productivity driven culture, that failure basically means, or that we kind of like feel ashamed by it, because we are conditioned to think in the non-negotiable terms of productivity. We're forced to only measure ourselves and our accomplishments according to a benchmark that we never agreed to. So that was the first takeaway. And then the second takeaway is that you don't really know if what you did was a success or a failure. At least you don't until, way after. And I say that especially with the failures. The success is kind of like, if you experience it as a success that day, we can safely say, okay, you can have that. Just, it's a success. We can label it that way. We don't have to change that over time. But if you're labeling it a failure immediately, you're basically too soon, because you can't judge that. You have to just see how it matures. And maybe just like me, it was the biggest success of the week. And then the third thing that I would have for you is that if you take on something and you don't know if you can do it, that is, and if it's something creative, if it's your art, then that is your thing. So in the normal world, if you can't do something, you're hired to do something but you're not sure, that's kind of like a risk, because we have a society where failure is like not a desirable outcome. But if you are creative, then the projects you think of, the ideas you have that are on the cusp of where you're able to see how you will be able to do it, or on the cusp of what you're able to articulate, or on the cusp of what you think you can accomplish. That is really where your best art is created. If you think you might fail, that's where the magic is. And this can be either in an individual piece, but it can also be in a routine. So for example, maybe you say, well, I'm a blogger, and um, uh, yeah, I blog, I don't know, like 3 times a week. And uh, I kind of like have that idea of, um, it always works out fine. So I don't really feel challenged anymore. Then kind of like up leveling to the level where you might fail can either be like, okay, how about you change up your routine to writing one long read every week? It can be that the art itself, you're going to change the art itself, or you're going to narrow down the conditions. Make 3 blog posts every week about the same subject but from different angles. Or make five blog posts, so you have the same amount of time that you can dedicate to writing, but now you're going to create 5 blog posts. Uh, um, you can create different conditions to create the same art if you feel that you're in the safe zone, or you can change the art itself and bring it back from your safe zone, if you have the luxury of being the type of artist that is really grounded in what they do and feel that you haven't failed in ages, and you're like, yeah, you have a point. You can start looking for ways to make it more difficult for you, and to kind of like bring yourself closer to that point where you're not really sure anymore and you might fail. So overall, the big takeaway is that in regular society, failure is uh, a very difficult subject. I mean, I would say don't try this out don't do this at work. Just know that you're not paid to fail. But when it comes to your creativity and to your art, that's really where the magic happens. And of course, there's a lot of in between, because in corporations and in normal life as well, we have to learn to be fearless and to just see every failure as an experiment, and every failure see it as data. But I'm just kind of like parking that, like that's not our department. But as creatives and as artists, failure is where, and especially on the cusp of failure, that's where the most interesting things happen. So, as I said, if you want to work with me on creating your own work schedule where every Friday you look back on what you did, subscribe to this channel, because next week I'll be posting about that topic so that you can do it at home. Or if you want to work with me, it's in the description box, the offer for it. Okay, so see you next week at the next video, and in 2 weeks I will be here with a rockstar take on, I don't know, on what? I don't know. I'm going for a rockstar take on art. And I'm pretty sure that's on the cusp of what I'm able to do, and that I could very, very well fail on that. So in 2 weeks' time, a rockstar take on arts.